I'm John Paul Caponegro. Half of learning to make a good print is knowing what to look for. And that's what I'd like to help you with in this video. So when it comes to making photographic prints, we could simplify this to one word: detail. And that's focus, which extends to depth of field; dynamic range, the entire tonal structure from deep shadows to bright highlights; gradation, that smooth, continuous tone quality that makes things look so realistic; a low signal to noise ratio. If there is any grain, we'd like it to be from our subject and not from the medium. Flawless surfaces, or no process artifacts, no dust, no scratches, no ink spatter. We'd like the frame to be a clear window into which we can see the world. Exceptions are usually seen as failures or poor technique, or statements if they're done purposefully, with intention, and consistently. They become a part of your style, at least the style of a body of work. So let's look a little bit more closely at what to look for in prints. And this applies both to color and black and white prints. Let's start with banding. You may send a file like this to your printer and get a print like this with broad, horizontal, dark feathered bands across the print. This is a mechanical error. The printer head is passing back and forth unevenly across the paper, or at the wrong angle. The first thing to do is check the head alignment. You just realign the head, and with proper alignment, everything smooths back out. If that doesn't happen, check the speed with which the file is being spooled over to the printer. You could be chewing up too many resources on the same computer that you're delivering the file to the printer from, or you could be trying to push that data through too long a cord. It slows the thing down, and it may cause this. Now, this kind of broad, feathered, dark banding is very different than the tiny, thin, light, or multicolored banding that you might find from a nozzle clog, clean the heads, or from the printer passing the paper through the printer a little too slowly or a little too fast. There you can adjust the print speed with advanced media settings. Gradation. Again, that continuous tone, smooth quality that makes things seem realistic. Or if you don't have it, seem so unrealistic. If you have banding like this in a file and you send it to the printer, it's going to print like that. The only way for it not to print is to go back to the original source and remove it. And usually blurring or noise reduction is not going to do that. It's just going to make it worse. Go back to the original file, the raw file, processed in a higher bit depth, 16-bit, which can support aggressive adjustments in contrast and saturation without posterizing or banding. Really, posterization is a better word. And taking smooth transitions and turning them into contours. Again, go back to the source and deliver really great information to the printer. When you do that, you'll get a great print. Noise. Some subjects are inherently noisy, and if you look at the dunes, you probably wouldn't ever notice the noise in the file. If you look at the sky, however, you see it quite quickly. So some smooth subjects like water, skies, flesh, it tends to show grain much more readily, and you may not see it in other areas of the print. And you may want to treat it selectively as well. If we reduce the noise so that it disappears from the sky, the dunes here are getting a little bit soft. You may want to selectively reduce the noise on the sky only so that you get some of that granular, sharp quality that you see in the foreground. Sometimes a little bit noise actually makes the image look sharper, but it can take smooth surfaces and turn them gritty. So you really want to be sensitive to the texture of the subject inside the frame. Sharpening, same thing, sensitivity. And we choose a great lens, we go for a high resolution sensor, all to make our images look crisp and real, and then we get software and we overdo it. And suddenly everything becomes holy because it's got a halo around it, and this texture gets exaggerated, so kittens look like they're made of steel wool. You might get extra grain in addition to those sharp edges. You might even get some saturation shifts, particularly down on a granular level. You get multicolored noise. You can make a real mess fast if you don't know what you're doing. And the main thing is just be sensitive to texture. Know what to look for. All of the things that I just mentioned, line and texture and color. Pull back and you can get some beautiful results. So try not to overcompensate. Blacks. Rich blacks set the dynamic range of an image along with the whites. And we'd love that ink to be laid down so heavy we get this luscious, juicy, dark, rich black. But it can be overdone. You can put too much ink down on the paper, and it may lose the detail that you see on the screen. If you see this when a print comes out at first, give it 5 minutes and let it dry up. It dries lighter. You may see the shadow detail appear after it dries, but if it's still not there, but you see it on the monitor, you're going to need to adjust the shadows up to compensate for the printer laying down so much ink, which produces wonderful, rich midtones, but can sometimes lose deep shadow detail. However, if that's in your file, if you're delivering a file that just doesn't have shadow detail, well, of course it's not going to print. Again, go back to the source and get those great blacks back, as I did here. And you can see that little touch brings more space and light and atmosphere into the whole thing. It takes it, again, moving away from graphic and more photographic. Of course, if we take this image and we print it, not on a photo paper, which has that dense, rich black, but on a matte paper, it's going to soften the whole thing. It's a necessary trade-off as we move into a different material, which might seem organic and fibrous and soft. It may have all of these great touchy-feely qualities that we really like, but we've got to be willing to sacrifice some of that rich black and a little bit of saturation in those deep shadows. Whites, equally important. It's set by the paper that you're printing it on. Some papers are a little warmer, some people are a little cooler, a little blue, a little yellow. If we deliver a file that just has overly full highlights, it's just not going to glow in the same way. But if we overdo the adjustment and we clip values in our file, we're going to see paper weight in the print. And it's generally something that you want to avoid. You'd like the right balance between things that are too full and things that are too hot. Find that sweet spot where just a few trace areas are near paper white, and then you've got beautiful, subtle, delicate gradations in the highlights. I think this is even more important than deep shadow detail. Separation or contrast. Generally, we're thinking about it in the midtones that exist throughout the entire tonal scale. And we can take an image like this, and it looks great, but add a little bit more midtone contrast, and it looks even better. Things start to bloom, it starts to glow a little bit more. Often we like things that seem kind of luminous to the point where they have this inner glow. We take luminous and make it numinous, but we can take it too far. If we drive too much contrast in that, not just in the highlights and the shadows where we start to lose detail, but also in the midtones, we can lose some separation. Things start to clump up, become heavy. They lose some of the distinction that we have in the original file. So again, process your files with more sensitivity. And this is the kind of thing where very often we lose a little bit of that midtone separation as we print to the lower dynamic range of the piece of paper. And those midtones are often benefited tremendously by expanding the separation in the midtones. It's one of the classic things. Almost every print wants just a little bit more midtone contrast to really glow. Saturation. And of course, this applies to color images, not to black and white images, unless they're blue and white images or brown and white images like cyanotypes or platinum prints, right? Then it really matters just how much saturation you have or not, even though they're monochromatic images. But in a full color image, things can seem a little listless, a little anemic. Give them just a little bit more saturation and they start to glow. They come to life. They become much richer. And once again, we can overdo this and take color that seems somewhat naturalistic or at least believable and turn it into something that's completely unbelievable. If we do this, we want to do this for effect. We're starting to move away from photographic into graphic, and we're starting to make the image about the color choices first and then secondarily about the subjects that we're hanging the color on. You might just want to become completely abstract. So once again, there is such a thing as too much of a good thing. Materials. Well, you know, that's one of the things I can't really show you on this video. We're all looking at it on a piece of glass or plastic. But I can talk to you a little bit about moving from a matte surface where you've got these beautiful, rich, saturated highlights, more so than on a photo paper, onto a photo paper where you might lose a little bit of saturation in the highlights, but you gain a lot of saturation in the darker values, as well as a deep, rich black. This image has an entirely different color structure. It might be better served on a matte paper if that matte surface matches the statement that you want to make, which may or may not be in line with a watery, slicker surface. Similarly, an image like this, the texture is another aspect of the image, but on default, you'd be looking at something like this with this expanded dynamic range, those deep, rich blacks, the shadow separation and saturation down there, and you're going to hold a lot more on a matte paper. You're just going to lose some of that black. You're going to have a little less saturation down in those deep, dark areas than you will, let's say, a photo paper. But you may ultimately move into a matte paper because you'd like its dusty surface to be matching the subject itself, that desert dust. Right? So we're trading off dynamic range for texture, which is right. It depends on the statement that you want to make. Either one could be right, and you may want to look to other images within a series that you're presenting it with to make these decisions. But first, check in with your heart. I think it's important just to print these things and see what it looks like. And this is a great example. One of my alums came in and printed this image in the studio during a workshop. She made this small 8x10, beautiful portrait she could hold. And to look at it, you had to come close to it. It kind of had this intimate quality, but also it's kind of this possessive quality as well. When she moved into full scale, like life size, there was something about the portrait that just, it felt like you were being looked at, much more than in the smaller portrait. And even more than in, say, the big poster-sized image. She made all of these different sizes, hung them up, and experienced what it was like to look at this image at different scales, how far people stood from them, and what the experience was. Was it a graphic experience emphasizing form in the very large print? Was it a very realistic, life-size experience that she was looking for? Just kind of sit with her for a day or two, and I think it's important to do that, and to sort of live with the print and see how it works on you. Collect your impressions of it, and maybe even other people's impressions, and see ultimately what's going to serve the image best. It's not a matter of bigger is better. It's just bigger is bigger, and sometimes that works, and other times smaller is a more compelling experience. Scale is an important aspect of our print. I always laugh when I make smaller prints of my landscapes. I couldn't possibly make them life size, and to be actually able to hold them and say, look, I'm holding Death Valley in my hands, or look, here's Antarctica right between my fingers. It's a surreal experience, kind of a magical experience, which I really appreciate. Talk a little bit about framing or the presentation of the prints. Think of the frames as the transition between the virtual space inside the image and the physical space that it's actually occupying. Now, this frame just wouldn't work as well in this glass and steel building. You might want to take other cues from the environment to frame it a little differently for that context. Once again, it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. And you do want to think about the environment that the print is finally living in, both in terms of the frame and in terms of the scale. Context. Now, we were just talking about environment, and your images are going to be presenting very different experiences if they're in museums or galleries, or when they live in homes or, say, a boutique hotel. And there are probably some spaces you don't want your images to be in, like the Taco Bell Hotel. It's not for me, not my images, maybe some other kinds. So let's recap some of the things to look for in prints. Right style, right materials, right scale, right presentation, right context. Well, right for who? Right for the statement that you'd like to make. You'd like to present a special kind of experience. Now, think of the print as an event. It creates an event for you, for your images, and most importantly, for your audience. They really change the atmosphere of the spaces that they occupy. And there isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, but as you mindfully choose all of the different qualities I've been talking about, showing that you are in control of your technique, and that if you've deviated from some of those things, or you've done certain things consistently, you're communicating your vision much more powerfully. It's a real fun experience. So remember, if you break the rules accidentally, it's called a mistake. But if you break them intentionally, it's called innovation. So give yourself whatever liberty you need to do, but do it thoughtfully. There are many other resources on printing and how to achieve the best print quality possible. Give you points of control to make all of these decisions in my online library. And there you'll find a lot of resources on printing, from articles to read, to videos to watch, to files to download, including this free ebook, The Digital Printing Quick Start Guide. Grab your copy. And if you really get into printing, come see me in one of my digital printing workshops. For over 25 years, I've helped thousands of people make better prints. I absolutely love holding my images, and I love seeing my alums hold their images too. There's just something magical. I mean, you grab it and say, look, I made this. It's like we all become little kids again. And then the physical object creates an environment. I usually think of the print as an event. It just changes the atmosphere. It's an event making one, and it's an event looking at one. It's an event living with one. And I wish that for you.